Chapter 65, Mutant Part. The floor sunk down, then came up again at the spot, illuminated by the spotlight. There was now an enormous metal crate atop of it. The sound of chafing friction could be heard from within the crate before it had entered the range of the spotlight. The sound was extremely uncanny. The metal crate was the size of a standard small shipping container. It was nearly 6 meters in length and over 2 meters in height and width. It was extremely close in length to the standard-sized fighting stage. The fighting arena went silent when this metal crate first appeared before everyone's eyes. Then the shouts and whistles from the spectator stands grew in boos and laughter. God, what a large fellow! This size, is it a brown bear, a Muay tiger, black caiman? This is shameless enough. This is cruel enough. Can we keep betting? Can we change our bets? Clearly, there was some controversy in the fighting arena, though the majority of people were glad to see what was happening. They didn't care if they win their bets or not. They just wanted to see the spilling of blood, though there should be a bit of suspense, of course. A one-sided battle would make people feel like something was a bit missing. The metal crate opened from the front at this moment, but nothing came out. Instead, a ang-ang sound rang out along with the exciting sound of ramming. The beast had ample vigor, but this sound. The metal crate opened from all sides, while everyone was looking at each other in display, and the inner content was revealed. The whole venue was stunned. There were actually 2 cages placed within the crate. They were about equal sizes. One was a pitch-black, semi-translucent glass box. Its inner content could not be seen. The other was a typical metal cage. The fellow inside was turning around and around in circles. It had long fangs. Its build was thick and bulky. It had a thick hide and tough bones. It could be considered a colossal animal with considerable strength. It rammed against the metal cage, causing banging sounds. This was a wild boar. Fine then. In reality, if 99% of the people in the fighting arena were tossed down there to face this heavy wild beast, which weighed over several hundred kilograms, they would be condemned to death. But there was something wrong with this scene. They wanted to see the devilish scene of the laceration of flesh and the splattering of blood. Not a chase and run, ram and dodge comedy show. And furthermore, they waited over 10 minutes for this. A wild boar. The boos exploded with a rumble. All of the audience in the spectator stands, be it bosses of some company or officials of some department, completely discarded all of their reservations. They vented to the fullest. They cursed F*CKU and hissed F*CKU to whomever they found displeasing to the eye. The pressure from the heaven-shaking boos made it so that the DJ did not dare to speak a word. Rui Wen still stood quietly on the fighting stage, with her eyes closed. Then off the stage, the black glass box next to the metal cage opened from the front without a sound. The opening to the pitch-black box did not reveal anything, but the constantly agitated wild boar in the metal cage moaned with a sharp cry. It was as if a pig-slaughtering blade had been stabbed into its stomach. The boos of the fighting arena were forcefully interrupted by this ear-piercing cry. Then the audience saw the wild boar try to ram its way out of its cage, as if its life depended on it. The ramming attack was quite the desperate attempt, causing the entire cage to shift. The 2 containers were forcefully pulled 3 meters apart. The boar kept ramming until it reached the fighting stage, and it kept on trying, causing rumbles to ring out from the collision with the stage. What the hell is going on? Luo Nan was a bit annoyed and anxious. The sacrificial ritual had reached its key point. Countless lines emerged within the burning cloud sea to establish an even more exquisite structure, a structure that was created by the valiant instinct of the human-faced arachnid. A profound and unpredictable order was contained inside. Luo Nan did not try to analyze this. The human-faced arachnid was already on a level that exceeded Luo Nan. There was no point in forcefully trying to decipher its mysteries. All Luo Nan could do right now was to preserve the finalized structure of the altar and let the arachnid maintain its stability. Right now Luo Nan was doing fine, and the two people atop the altar were doing excellent as well. The trick that was played out on the fighting stage had caused the supply of the turbid flow of emotions to become somewhat chaotic. But this didn't really matter. The smell of a blazing flame didn't mean that a cooked dish would be made. The more adjustments that were made with this tiny heat for slow cooking, the more the dish would simmer dry and be burned through. This herd of hog and lamb were simply putting the final nail in their own coffin. But then the wild boar rammed against the fighting stage in a crazed fashion at this time, causing the outside disturbance to suddenly increase. The human-faced arachnid was fine, but Luo Nan was really worried about Rui Wen becoming distracted. Although Luo Nan was worried, the audience was quite excited. Ho ho, what a cheap trick! Regardless of how many times they had seen it before, the audience loved watching arranged suspense where build-up occurs after being bottled up. Their interest was firmly hooked, and all the boos and curses disappeared completely. The fighting arena actually turned much quieter. Then something could be seen from the black glass box at last. A long forked tongue stuck to the ground. It extended and retracted, revealing a coarse surface. A trillion cells for perception replaced the eyes and the nose, sensing the external environment. Is it a snake or a lizard? Hurry and start already, show the head. The being seemed to have felt the stirring emotions in the outside environment, for it stretched out its long and narrow head out from the glass box. It looked to be a type of lizard. The audience in the spectator stands felt that something was off when the lizard had only stretched out halfway. Wasn't its skull around 2 meters long? The long and deep split of its mouth took up most of its head. It nearly reached the metal cage beneath the fighting stage, and that pitiful wild boar was trying to escape with all its might, practically bringing its cage up to the stage. Based on the length of its skull, how long would its body be? How was it able to fit in the glass box? Then reality showed it stretch out 4 meters in length, with its tough and flexible body like it was swimming in the air. Only its tail had yet to emerge. From the body that was shown so far, the mouth took up approximately half its length. It was similar to an alligator at first glance with its external appearance, but it was much larger. Its limbs were extremely thick and bulky, propping up its stomach far away from the ground. Its forked tongue dangled down, sticking to the ground, contracting and extending. It looked very bizarre and cautious. What was this thing? Crag Burst already growled in a low voice, while Luo Nan was puzzled. I'll F ***, K your B ****H. Before Crag Burst could finish cursing, the 2-meter monstrosity opened its large mouth without any warning. Thousands of thick, sharp teeth were densely packed together in 4 columns. The camera recorded it faithfully, and the video was broadcasted in a close-up view to appear distinctively in everyone's eyes. The entire venue went cold in an instant. A sudden dash, a bite, a gnash, a swallow. The monster had performed a series of concise movements in this manner, and the glaring glow of blood spurted out right in front of it. The several hundred-kilogram heavy wild boar and the cage of solid metal that surrounded it suddenly disappeared by half. They had been swallowed by the monster with a single bite. Shrieking came from all around. This situation where half the fighting arena was quiet and half was in hysteria was rarely seen. And the giant broadcast display atop the fighting arena was withdrawn upwards and put away, opening up the space above the fighting arena. Then a maglev-type floating platform came dropping down from an entrance that had split open on the upper level of the fighting arena. There were no handrails or fencings whatsoever, but Jack stood steadily atop the platform wearing a white dress shirt, black slacks, and a black bow tie, the official uniform of a referee. Although he looked down from high above, his face was expressionless. He turned a blind eye to the bizarre situation in the fighting arena. He lifted both his hands up slightly and separated them to two sides. One side represented Rui Wen, who was standing silently. The other side represented the monster, which had brutally swallowed its food. Jack spoke in a calm and unshaken voice. The predator, Rui Wen. The mutant, Greatmaw Basilisk. Let the Beast King battle begin. A mutant, it really was a mutant. Trembling and excitement dominated over everything. The silence had passed in the blink of an eye. The gamblers and the spectators all went crazy with shrieking, shaking fists, and stamping feet. The entire fighting arena simply exploded. Chapter 65, Mutant Part 2-2. Oh ho ho, who's the damned person who thought of this idea? I love him to death. Hurry up and start already, start. Or do I have to wait for it to finish eating that boar in the takeout cage? Look at those 4 rows of sharp teeth. I wonder what it feels like when those fine limbs are rolling around in its mouth. Won't someone shoot a close-up shot? Hey, you on stage, did you open your eyes yet? Look how cute this baby is. The so-called Beast King battle had yet to begin, but each spectator within the fighting arena was overflowing with excitement. When this mutant was brought out as the main opponent in the fighting arena, everyone knew that the battle was going to be completely lopsided. Only the prelude and the ending could be truly enjoyed to their heart's content. Rui Wen continued to stand in silence with her eyes closed at this moment. This was the best posture she could assume to maintain the suspense. Some people were truly worried that this battle scene would be soon reduced to a hunting show when this flat-chested witch sees the terror of this Greatmaw Basilisk with her own eyes. I'll F *** K your B *** H ***. I'll F *** K your B *** H. As Crag Burst spat curses, he probed out with his hand to touch the transparent defensive wall in front of him. He had to break open this barrier right now in order to save Rui Wen from the jaws of the mutant. Obviously, this wouldn't be a problem if he had time for 8 fists. This ultimately required a process. What if he excited the Greatmaw Basilisk's fierce nature? Then Rui Wen would really be dead 1,000 times over. Crag Burst was full of regrets right now. Why didn't he put a stop to this damned road of verdicts earlier? Why didn't he stop this crisis from happening? Crag Burst did a few rounds of fast calculations and confirmed that he would need at least 5-7 fists for a guarantee to burst open the defensive wall. This was under the premise that there was no additional interference from the defensive forces of the fighting arena. He had to get some support due to the uncertainty of the situation. Scout, I need a bit of time. A map, which was clearly drawn at the last minute, was transmitted over the psychic wave network, interrupting Crag Burst midway. A route was clearly marked on the drawing that started from Crag Burst's current position to some area in the upper levels. Luo Nan's voice transmitted over, "Don't cause a storm. Enter the VIP box. Jack just came from there. It contains the only shortcut passageway. You still have time. The damned lizard still needs time to digest. The Greatmaw Basilisk needs only 2 minutes to digest that amount of food. Then you have 2 minutes. I'll buy some time if that's not enough." "All right." Crag Burst did not speak any further. He turned around and left. Right now, trusting his comrade was his only option, for Luo Nan's previous performance was worthy of his trust. Right when Crag Burst walked back into the waiting area, Jack shot a glance at him from the skies above the fighting arena. This minute action was completely exposed under Luo Nan's mental senses. A thought suddenly emerged in Luo Nan's mind. He recalled the most important piece of information, and he rushed to warn Crag Burst. "Careful, Jack has discovered you. He's a burner. He possesses some sort of field of the controlling nature. His strength is no small matter." Understood. Crag Burst was quite shocked, but he didn't say anything else. Instead, he increased his speed and rushed like mad in the corridor. The gangsters standing guard had already discovered him, but none were able to stop his sudden assault. Jack definitely received this information, but his face still remained a sheet of cold desolation atop the maglev platform. Not a change could be seen. This fellow... Luo Nan had heard Jack mention Mr. Ma's precious little baby with the contact, but he had assumed it was just a wild animal. He never expected that Jack would actually take things this far without shame. A mutant. The current situation was much more dangerous than that observed by Crag Burst. The sacrificial ritual was ongoing. The Human-Faced Arachnid and Rui Wen maintained their equilibrium between cruelness and frailty. While the two sides were being pushed higher and higher in level, Luo Nan didn't know when this whole thing would end. Rui Wen wouldn't be able to take on the enemy as long as the sacrificial ritual hadn't ended. The equilibrium would collapse in an instant, causing her to meet death a step earlier. Right now, the person who bore the most arduous task in the fighting arena was Luo Nan. He had to keep the entire altar framework from collapsing, and he had to pay attention to changes in the situation. He had to guide a route for Crag Burst without delay, and he had to focus his attention on Jack. He had to watch the Greatmaw Basilisk closely and avoid new shifts in circumstances from occurring. One mind was doing two things. One mind was doing many things. The all-encompassing view of his mental senses took in information from all sides in parallel, and he was forced to process it. One inattentive misstep would cause everything to collapse. He wasn't an omniscient god, but he was doing the work of a god. The Greatmaw Basilisk's meal was coming to an end. It had eaten the second half of the wild boar with its metal cage in a short dozen of seconds. It swallowed the food down quite smoothly. At first, its enormous stomach could be seen touching the ground, but then it rapidly turned back to normal. The highly corrosive stomach, acid in its belly, possessed a terrifying digestive ability. The several 100-kilogram wild boar and at least half of the heavy metal cage had already been mostly digested in a short minute or so. The related energy entered the mutant's body, increasing the temperature of its blood by several degrees. Its thick double-layered eyelids opened at this time. Dark yellow cold cracks could be seen on its enormous eyeballs. It gave people the feeling of callousness. It assessed the surrounding environment. From the Greatmaw Basilisk's perspective, the noisemakers all around it were what it detested the most. but it had already tried to cross the defensive wall with its tail after it had finished eating. It wouldn't be able to break through that easily. And so it decided to give up its difficulties and go for what was easy. It would choose its only option, which was to eat the simplest target. The Greatmaw Basilisk stared fixed at the target on top the fighting stage. Its long tongue stuck towards the ground, tasting around in probing. It uncovered even deeper information. This slender animal was actually a certain threat. The mutant was the first-rate hunter. This was not a situation it would allow. The Greatmaw Basilisk did not have any vocal cords. It didn't have the ability to roar loudly. Instead, it growled deep and low. This was enough, though. The deep and low sound waves went through the amplifier and were spread to the entire venue. Its ice-cold pupils stared fixed into the camera and were broadcasted to every display. The people in the audience had their hearts palpitated in an instant before they stood up one by one in excitement. They raised their arms and shouted loudly, "Judgment, judgment, judgment!" The atmosphere in the arena was really about to explode. This was solely due to the word mutant. Mutants had stood at the apex of the world's food chain for 30 years after the Third War. They were the former overlords who forcefully trod humanity beneath their feet. The wilderness, the oceans, and part of the skies all became part of their domain. The world's population, exceeding 10 billion people, was squeezed and confined into 88 giant metropolises. Humanity was in imminent danger for a time. Humanity's development of the deep blue walkers had changed the means of war. Victory was obtained one battle after another, but no one would dare say that humanity had truly entered a full counteroffensive stage. To reclaim lost territory and the like was something that was only known to be a goal of the far future. This was the mental recollection that the word mutant gave to people of the present era, especially to the post-war generation. The bloody events in the fighting arena had given the spectators some fear, but the layout and the strong defenses of the fighting arena gave them a positive indication. They were the true dictators of the fighting arena. They were the strong who could enjoy everything that was happening. The exciting feeling that came with being in a special dominating position could not be brought by any other fierce animal. This illusionary, yet powerful and dominating status caused the flames in the spectators' hearts to burst with even more intense blazes. The people in the back rows stood up. The spectators in the front rows gathered forward, squeezing against the transparent defensive walls. They made every effort to close the distance and get a view of the savage appearance of the Greatmaw Basilisk. Luo Nan swept a cold gaze over the chaotic situation. Though these spectators were the largest source of the commotion, it was of no consequence to the structure of the altar. Who would pay heed to the hogs and lamb that were about to have their blood spilled on the altar? But then a subtle change occurred at this very moment. While people stood up one after another, while crazed shouts rang loudly in the atmosphere, there was someone who genuinely wasn't able to stand up. Some middle-aged man in the crowd had been laughing to his heart's content. He stood up and shouted loudly, but then his complexion suddenly went stiff. He pressed against his chest, and the red glow that spread across his face turned into a deathly ash. In the end, he collapsed into his seat in paralysis. Then he struggled twice before becoming motionless. Chapter 66, Desolate Sword Part. No one discovered this anomaly. Everyone's gazes were all amassed towards the fighting stage to go enjoy the scene of the battle that was destined to come to a rapid end. That was the first Right now, Luo Nan's energy was divided until the point of indivisibility. He didn't have the strength nor the need to lament over the loss of life. He just sensed that some marvelous element had begun to flourish upon the altar when that life was burned away. The element content was too minute. Luo Nan was unable to see any distinct changes, but then there was another one, causing yet another two, then three, and now there were many. The relevant numeral digits continued to rise without end within the scope of his mental senses. The accumulated marvelous elements didn't increase in quantity. Instead, they were like a ratio of paints, turning from shallow colors to denser colors. This was the color of death. The flow of blood would ultimately run dry. The sacrifices had been stabbed by a blade to release blood, and the time had more or less come for their organs to fail. They were just the first batch to fall. The thought of killing never crossed Luo Nan's mind, but he also didn't have any thoughts to go save people. He had to focus on the framework of the altar. He had to concentrate on the new elements that were permeating in and the subtle changes that came with them. Every single individual that died was a challenge for the supply of the burning cloud of fire. But looking at the overall structure as a whole, the addition of a pigment of death caused a complementary situation where one falls and the other rises. The pigment of death couldn't provide energy, but it built a brand new structure in the infrastructure. It was like a bridge. It led the ritualists toward a plane once untouchable. From the hysteria of life to touch the desolation of death. The human-faced arachnid and Rui Wen were fine, and this included Luo Nan as well. They all touched this open, yet deep realm. Luo Nan was a bit spellbound. The pressure of information, which had nearly clogged him up, suddenly was erased a little within this desolation of death. A lot of information had value on the plane of life, but they no longer had any meaning once they entered the realm of death. Life and death blended together, and many things were strained through like a filter. This was a sort of awareness, but Luo Nan's awareness was at a very shallow level, especially when compared with Rui Wen's. When the realm of death opened towards them, Luo Nan discovered that Rui Wen had an acuity inconceivable in regards to this realm. Her acuity far exceeded that of Luo Nan, of the human-faced arachnid. She was able to reap new gains every time a speck of life faded away to silence. Luo Nan had the vague sensation that Rui Wen had come to his side, and that they were looking abreast at each flame of life that was extinguishing within the spectator stands. The flames extinguished, collapsed, and evolved, and information still incomprehensible to him was obtained from within. But from another perspective, Luo Nan wouldn't have been able to discover this information were it not for Rui Wen. It was because of her existence that he was able to access it. He didn't know what use this was, but there was one point he was absolutely clear on. Rui Wen had discovered this information. She could exploit the forces of death, something the human-faced arachnid was incapable of. And so the equilibrium of the altar was suddenly smashed apart because of this. Rui Wen and the human-faced arachnid's levels continued to mutually rise, but the current circumstance was the following. For every level the human-faced arachnid rose by, Rui Wen would rise by double. So in just a few breaths of time, the mutual sharpening, the mutual advancement in power, grew closer to the edge of collapse. The rules of the altar were as follows: who will be reduced to the weak, who will become the sacrificial offering. The human-faced arachnid shrieked with an ear-piercing cry. This was a situation that it had single-handedly created, yet it had placed itself on the altar to ultimately become a sacrificial offering. But its instinct to live caused it to struggle. Even if it was destined to perish, it would not be the first. Luo Nan watched this scene. He watched the burning clouds of flame grow in greater turmoil. He watched the shouts of the spectators within the fighting arena, which was like the roaring of the mountains and seas. He watched the star, and its piercing aura suspended and shining in the remote darkness. He watched the final struggles of the spider demon. For some inexplicable reason, he didn't feel the rippling of any emotion whatsoever. It was as if he was watching a mime show that had nothing to do with him at all. Or maybe he was looking at an array of calculations in a formula. It wasn't that he lost the ability to feel, he just didn't have the leeway to display his emotions. Maintaining the framework of the altar had already overdrafted all his energy. Then Crag Burst contacted him right at this moment. "Scout, I've arrived at the VIP box." "Oh crap," the giant lizard. The Greatmaw Basilisk had started its move. It slowly changed its angle to fix the most optimal line of path towards its prey. It was going to launch an attack immediately based on its nature. Crag Burst had just broken into the VIP box, knocking out the contact whom had been overwhelmed with shock and was about to shout. Crag Burst was able to see everything that was happening in the arena from that viewpoint. He had notified Luo Nan in a loud voice. "Go faster, don't get distracted." The information that Luo Nan transmitted over was calm and level to the max. Crag Burst clearly hesitated for a moment, but when he heard Luo Nan's words, he charged his way into the secret passageway of the VIP box and made a mad dash towards Jack's location. Luo Nan didn't pay special attention to the actions of the Greatmaw Basilisk, for right now he couldn't handle the heavy load on his mind. He had automatically made an adjustment and divided his attention into two parts: the situation inside and outside the framework. He put main priority on the former and secondary priority on the later. It was without a doubt that resolving the situation within the framework took precedence. As for what was outside the framework, it would be brought within the framework to be settled as well. This was truly a wonderful example of dichotomy. The thought had barely stirred, and the dark chains trembled with its vibrating cry. It strode through space and came forth, directly targeting the Greatmaw Basilisk. Luo Nan didn't know if he could control this mutant. His goal wasn't that lofty. He was just using methods unique to himself to pull what was outside the framework inside the framework. When the mutant enters the framework, who knows if it'll become a priest or a sacrificial offering? The Greatmaw Basilisk made its move. Its thick and solid limbs swayed at fast speed, amidst the screams that were shouting themselves hoarse from the spectator stands. The mutant stepped onto the meter-high fighting stage with ease, its enormous body soaring through the air. Its enormous mouth, which could bite through steel, split open and faced Rui Wen with an attack. Luo Nan watched all of this with a cold gaze. The dark chains had already penetrated the Greatmaw Basilisk's head, and a marvelous connection finished establishing. From Luo Nan's perspective, the Greatmaw Basilisk wasn't throwing itself at Rui Wen, but onto the framework of his altar. It wasn't a collision, it was just a leap onto the stage. Everything interweaved within the washes of colors from the plane of reality, the mental plane, and emotions. The framework of his altar had truly linked each plane together to tower majestically. Rui Wen still had yet to open her eyes, but she clearly felt what was happening. She made a crossing step with her feet at the key moment. She barely dodged by a hair's breadth, letting the frontal attack by the Greatmaw Basilisk sweep by her. Anyone would have to dodge when faced with an attack that was like a high-speed truck. The audience wasn't disappointed. It's good that you dodged. It's more exciting if things were back and forth. The shouts from the spectator stands were like the landslides of the mountains or the tsunamis of the oceans. But then, a faint, long hiss inexplicably penetrated everyone's ears amidst these screams. The Greatmaw Basilisk staggered from Rui Wen's body. Its enormous body was practically the length of the fighting stage, and it was probably too hasty in its attack, for it lost a bit of control. It wasn't able to stop its momentum after it had touched the ground, and it directly leaped past the fighting stage. It staggered, stumbling over directly to the spectator stands facing the back. The spectators saw the terrifying beast charge over. They clearly knew that it wouldn't be able to break through the defensive wall, but the spectators close to the fighting stage, especially the beautiful women who were in charge of painting the atmosphere, still shrieked in a half-faking, half-real manner. Halfway through, however, the shrieks turned into hysteria. This was a monstrosity with a length exceeding 5 meters and a weight exceeding 800 kilograms. Its pitch-black steel-like body suddenly withered in speed, and it suddenly shrunk by a factor. The bones that propped up its body lost their hardness, and its limbs fractured and snapped. It just slid on the ground, colliding into the defensive wall with a rumble. It didn't struggle. The callous pupils of its enormous eyes had already been eroded into 2 enormous black holes. The Greatmaw Basilisk laid, paralyzed on the ground. It breathed a mere 2-3 times, and its back, neck, head, chest. Large pieces of flesh were shed from its body, and in the blink of an eye, all that was left was its dense skeleton along with its veins and connective tissue. It died in a miserable defeat. It died in the most bizarre and cruel manner. And this scene was displayed before everyone's eyes. Luo Nan could confirm at last. Oh, so it became a sacrifice. Chapter 66, Desolate Sword, Part 2-2. The spectators were faced with this sudden stimulation that exceeded the limits they could bear. They cried and screamed in alarm, with perhaps the breath that they had stifled from just a moment ago. The shrieks and shouts of fear formed the scene of a chaotic hurricane. The hurricane swept through the entire venue to those on the opposite side of the Greatmaw Basilisk, on the spectator stands. Over 5 of the spectators couldn't handle this attack. Their eyes rolled over and they collapsed to the ground. More and more cases of collapse occurred in succession, making these cases no longer special. More and more people became aware of this, and more people were infected. There were medical personnel allocated to the fighting arena, but undulating waves of cries for help made it so that the limited number of medical personnel were at a loss for what to do. And when this piece of information converged together to emerge on a clear and definite scale, it was as if this fighting arena had fallen into a bone-piercing cold stream. A trembling sensation assaulted everyone at the scene. Luo Nan looked down at everything from above in silence. He could see death covering life as more and more information lost their meaning. The framework structure of the altar became more clear and explicit as a result. Frankly speaking, it didn't matter whether things were internal or external to the framework. The entire situation had become immediately open and clear once the Greatmaw Basilisk had been pulled into the framework of the altar. Under the framework of the altar, the killing intent of the Greatmaw Basilisk had formed a direct challenge to Rui Wen. The Greatmaw Basilisk's fleshly body was quite powerful on the material plane. It was completely on the level of a heavy truck, and it possessed innate toughness and destructive power. Yet this fellow was only at the level of an intelligent beast on the mental plane. Its level was at an unsurpassable distance away to those currently sustaining the altar, Rui Wen and the human-faced Arachnid. Things were as they should be. The Greatmaw Basilisk was reduced to a target to be slaughtered, and it also became an exquisite scapegoat. The struggles of the human-faced Arachnid had yielded some results. It had nearly been slaughtered together with the Greatmaw Basilisk by Rui Wen's star blade aura during the juncture between life and death. The mutant's abundant life force energy became the best shield and substitute for the human-faced Arachnid. The constantly accumulated pressure made it so that a sacrificial offering must die. It penetrated through, and the Greatmaw Basilisk took it all. The Greatmaw Basilisk became the convergence point of all the recoiling force. How could it not die? The human-faced Arachnid had saved its own tiny life, but in the end, it had suffered a miserable defeat. It got severed down by a level, but it had made large improvements through the overall growth and reductions. The only thing worrisome was its extremely weak state. It could not maintain its demonic body, and it transformed back into the Wraith sign in order to recover. The rule of the altar was that the winner takes all. It was without a doubt that Rui Wen was the one to receive the most gains from the entire process of the sacrificial ritual. The instant the Greatmaw Basilisk had set foot on the altar, Rui Wen's star had emitted a most brilliant radiance. Annihilating the soul and annihilating the body were two different aspects that couldn't be said to be better than one another. But when the soul and the fleshly body were annihilated at the same time, simultaneously only disturbing the two realms of the material and the mental, the incorporeal barrier between the two realms exploded apart. Rui Wen had done this, and now she slowly opened her eyes, her pupils still a string of seclusion. She just stood there, her gentle breathing bringing the resonance of chimes. On the mental plane, the turmoil of the burning clouds of flame formed sheets and sheets of nothingness. But from another perspective, the outlines of those sheets of nothingness were like a god of death that had stepped over from the void, raising its long scythe high in the air. Rui Wen was the sole victor atop the altar. Her star dominated everything and all those who were illuminated by the star's aura. All the sacrificial hogs and lamb in the entire framework would be squeezed dry of their last remaining value with just a mere thought. They would fall to the silence of death. Probably the only thing impeding Rui Wen was the speed of her comprehension over the information within. Luo Nan was probably the only person who could stop Rui Wen. All it would need was his determination to dismantle this framework. But he had no thoughts at all of doing so due to the price that would have to be paid and its corresponding recoil. Right now, he was observing the developing changes that were to follow. Unfortunately, the sealed-off ceiling above the fighting arena exploded open with a rumble in the next few seconds. Pieces of wood, shattered glass, and even steel fragments filled the sky. The spectators were already in weak states of mind, and several of them were pelted by this rain. Crag Burst had made it over, but then his chin smashed to the ground, causing a sound that was far more distinct than the mayhem he just caused. Crazy, she's awakened to her ability, and she's at least B rank 1 or higher. Crag Burst was clearly distracted by Rui Wen's awakening. He even forgot the extremely dangerous character right beneath him. But Luo Nan didn't cease monitoring Jack all this time. He gave a warning at once. Stop him. Standing on top of the maglev referee platform, Jack just shot a glance to the space above. Then his figure tilted, and he suddenly dropped soaring through the air. His target was none other than Rui Wen on the fighting stage. And Rui Wen aimed her gaze at Jack from atop the stage. Was this the third battle for the road of verdicts? Nope, these senseless antics were already over. There was no one in the entire fighting arena who was able to take in that atmosphere. Jack understood this point quite well, so he didn't put on any sort of fancy show. He just activated the deep CM field, which had caused Luo Nan many headaches. In fact, the deep CM field had considerable effects on the material plane. Before Jack could land, the fighting stage, which had been trodden upon by the heavy Greatmaw Basilisk, couldn't bear the pressure any longer. The central area warped and collapsed, leaving the entire ground caved in. Rui Wen's balance was more or less affected by the collapse of the fighting stage and the effect of the deep CM field. She used a series of small quick steps to adjust herself and casually avoided Jack's frontal assault. She stepped barefoot on the ruins of the fighting stage, barely being affected at all. But then a muffled explosion rang out immediately after. The flooring beneath the fighting stage had exploded open, causing fragments to splatter in the air. This was outside everyone's expectations, save for Jack's. Even Luo Nan, who possessed all-encompassing senses, didn't notice it. There had been explosives buried beneath the flooring of the fighting arena. For what D*Ned reason would these be prepared for? Rui Wen's figure couldn't avoid falling downwards. She would only have been able to make an adjustment after landing if it was her from before the Beast King battle. But the current Rui Wen was already completely different. She lifted her hand while she was dropping in a way that indicated practically no exertion of force. All the chaotic fragments of broken stone and wood within the empty air were sliced in half as an extremely sharp stream of air directly assaulted Jack with a hiss. Jack's reaction was quick. He lifted his right arm and then heard a muffled ringing. The sleeves of his shirt became lacerated and his skin split and burst, but no sight of blood could be seen. Beneath the layer of skin flashed the luster of metal. Jack's right arm was a part of his body that had been altered. His arm had been wrapped with a layer of artificial skin, and beneath it was super hard alloy. And at this moment, the layer of artificial skin could be seen rapidly rotting, withering away, and the alloy beneath it darkened a bit in color. High corrosion. No, it's a force much purer than that. The glow in Jack's robotic eye grew in intensity, locking dead fix on Rui Wen's face. Jack recorded the key information down into a recording device deeply buried somewhere in his body. Type C experimental body, number 2834, gifted power has awakened, recording characteristics, beginning the retrieval process. Rui Wen being at B rank. This is really high for someone who just awakened. Vice President Hu Yuli is ranked C+. Zhang Yingying and Susan are ranked C. Chapter 67, Priority Levels Part. The area beneath the fighting stage was a closed-off lifting platform, and further below was the freight transport passageway. The Greatmaw Basilisk was transporting over using this passageway and was lifted up into the fighting arena. And right now, the lifting platform was already moving. It went downwards at a fast speed. Rui Wen had stably landed. She exerted force with her thin yet sturdy body, launching an attack at Jack, who had yet to establish solid footing. She was more confident than ever before, so she was able to launch a frontal attack against this callous adjudicator. Then a short beep came out of nowhere, and Rui Wen bulged her eyes in shock. A powerful electric current exploded forth from some location within her chest, attacking her inner organs in an instant, spreading to her limbs and head. The electric current stimulated Rui Wen's muscles via her nervous system, causing her to instantly enter a rigid straight state. She lost her balance in a flash and fell towards Jack. "Come home, darling." Jack was not surprised at what happened. He reached out his hand and raised her by the arms. But soon he furrowed his brows as a sharp chill penetrated his skin, his organs even feeling cold. Even if Rui Wen had sustained heavy unexpected damages, her awakened ability still existed. The skin and flesh beneath Jack's ribs withered up in the blink of an eye to come off and expose a hinged alloy plate construction of a rib bone structure. Jack merely creased his brows in reaction to this. A rippling pulse exploded within the depths of Rui Wen's brain in the next moment. This time, all her attacking capabilities were truly erased, and her consciousness was erased as well. My God! Crag Burst was only late by a second, but he could only watch helplessly as Rui Wen fell into the enemy's hands. He struck out with a fist under his enormous rage. The sealed lifting platform rumbled with a boom, causing the surface of the platform to shake wildly. He didn't expect the expressionless Jack to grab the unconscious Rui Wen by her legs and use her as a shield. Crag Burst rushed to restrain himself amidst his shock. All the while, one side of the lifting platform had already revealed the upper section of the freight transport passageway. Jack didn't wait for the platform to land. He just grabbed Rui Wen and jumped off. Crag Burst didn't even need to think. He chased after them. But when he just entered the passageway, he was met with the sight of Jack raising up a handgun. Jack pulled the trigger, and a rumbling crack exploded within the half-sealed passageway. This was a sonic bomb. Crag Burst made a muffled snort as the intense sound waves vibrated his brain. His legs were a mess. Signs of cerebral concussion had already emerged. Jack wasn't affected by these troubles. The special structure of his brain made it so that he could make rapid adjustments on the fly, but he didn't continue fighting. He just grabbed Rui Wen under his arms and made a mad dash through the passageway. Luo Nan transmitted a question, "You all right?" Crag Burst uttered not a word as he crawled up and resumed his chase. He was a bit shaky at first, but then he recovered back as ever before. Shipping containers were able to be transporting using the freight transport passageway, so this place was extremely spacious. Some goods that shouldn't be exposed to people were commonly stowed here. To the two sides at the end of the passageway were garages and gangster members. They were stupidly ignorant of the circumstances that occurred in the fighting arena. They just so happened to be playing an MMO AR life simulation game together with laughs and giggles. The female host within the game made them quite spoiled from playing. Oohs and ahs rang through the passageway. Someone felt that this wasn't pleasurable enough. He started to make a phone call to contact real people. The problem was that the freight transport passageway was far too remote. He would need to take out a car and go pick them up. The caller could only curse as he got up and prepared to select a car from the garage for a speedy pickup. But before he could even stand up, the metal doors of the 6 large garages from the 2 sides of the passageway started to open at the same time. The identity check, password entry, and other security measures were completely skipped. The 4 wheel-style trucks had their lights turned on within the garage. Their harsh krypton bulbs illuminated the space within the passageway, dazzling the group of gangsters. They turned blind for a time. The ignition of the vehicles rumbled out in the next moment. The half-blind gangsters were all qualified to be drivers, so they were spooked out of their minds when they heard the vehicles start up. The AI went haywire, runs. No one knew who was it that shouted, but the facts of the matter were to turn around and run. It would be bad if they didn't run. If the 4 trucks set out, they wouldn't have space within the passageway and would be steamrolled to death. The unmanned heavy trucks moved practically simultaneously, but some were faster than others. They utilized the space to its limits and used the most effective means to set out from the garage in the shorted amount of time. They lined up in 2 rows and increased their speed as they went out on their routes. And throughout this entire process, any hindrances were of no concern. The group of people all ran deeper inside the passageway, and aside from 2 unfortunate people who were scrapped by the trucks, they suffered more from fear than from being hurt. But then the sound of heavy footsteps rang over right at this moment, and their dusky and starry vision gradually grew clear. They saw an important someone who couldn't possibly appear in a place like this. Jack, Mr. Jack. Jack ignored their existences and walked using large strides with someone clasped under his arms. His pace was quite fast, for he caught up to the 4 accelerating trucks in the blink of an eye. He chose the truck at the very front and jumped onto the roof, with that someone clasped under his arms. His inhuman jumping ability made the group of people gape in awe. Get lost. Crag Burst swept over like a storm. He saw Jack's actions from far, far away, and he wanted to increase his speed to catch up. But when he tried to pass through the back 2 trucks, 2 of the unmanned trucks walled him in at the same time. They were actually going to squeeze him to death. Crag Burst cursed loudly and displayed the same inhuman jumping ability as Jack, jumping on top of the 4-meter-high truck in an instant. But before he could get a steady footing, the truck beneath him suddenly slammed on its brakes. The enormous inertia flung him to the front of the vehicle. Another vehicle, which had been moving in parallel with the other cars, suddenly broke perpendicular. It illuminated Crag Burst with its light, ramming him across. In the end, Crag Burst's forte did not lie in his agility. A bang rang forth, and he was rammed head-on in midair, scrapping hard against the side walls of the passageway. The heavy truck chased after him and went for another ram, and an explosion rang out as the head of the truck smashed into the wall of the passageway. Damn it! Crag Burst rolled out of the way in time, dodging the wheels of the truck. The 2 trucks had actually been controlled by Jack to become 2 heavy weapons. Even if they didn't cause any damage to the thick-skinned Crag Burst, they had heavily stalled Crag Burst's pursuit. By the time Crag Burst got up to pick up the pace and chase once again, all he could see were the tail lights of the 2 trucks in front. Crag Burst's face was ashen. He gritted his teeth as he continued his mad dash. But then the 2 trucks in front had already left the passageway at this time. He looked at the lights of the vehicles, and one went right while the other went left. They had split routes. Crag Burst's scalp exploded. He didn't have time just then to look at Jack's movements. Who knows which vehicle he took Rui Wen to flee in. Scout! The shout on the psychic wave network had just been transmitted when the flapping of wings could be heard over his head. The mysteriously missing ink had streaked over his head to lead him the way. Luo Nan used the hexia to transmit. It's the right truck. They're heading directly outside of the city. You will need a means of transportation. Jack has the ability to control all information devices. You can only choose a non-AI model. Crap, where can I get a non-AI type nowadays? How about a motorcycle? The motorcycle you used to drive over here is quite decent. There's one here too. Make a turn to the freight area. It's 70 meters to your right. Crag Burst did not hesitate at all. He made a wild dash to the location described by Luo Nan. He knocked two gangsters over their flying and snatched a motorcycle. He then shot out like an arrow to pursue with all his might. Taking the motorcycle was like sharpening an axe to go cut firewood. This preparation would quicken the job. This was a high-powered motorcycle that a gangster loved to modify. Even though it was electric, it could easily reach stormy speeds of over 200 kilometers per hour on a decent surface. Crag Burst even remembered the limitations of Luo Nan's crow possession. He growled deeply, "Leave the rest to me, ahahaha. I'll screwjack all the way back to 8 generations." The motorcycle charged out of the passageway with a boom, entering the shabby public road. Crag Burst could still see the tail lights of the heavy truck at this time. He met the strong, rumbling winds head-on, used his powerful arms to keep the head of the motorcycle steady, and floored the accelerator. But then a dangerous omen suddenly sprouted in his mind as Luo Nan warned him at the same time. "Above you, oh crap." While Luo Nan could be heard with his rarely seen cursing, a dark red tail of flame cut over Crag Burst's head and hit the pavement. Before Crag Burst's eyes emerged a ball of fire that was violently expanding. A powerful shockwave and terrifying raging flames engulfed Crag Burst in a flash. Chapter 67, Priority Levels Part 2-2. Target A's vehicle has been destroyed. Significant fluctuations in the target's vital signs. The indistinct and pitch-black unmanned drone flirted past at low altitude. Its robotic eye locked to the burning flames below. Switching to targeting mode, confirming the second attack. Vapor. The warning signal was formed. The wingless drone ascended upwards, but it was still a step too late. A roar sounded forth from within the surging flames on the shabby road. Suddenly, a mass of shining flames split from it. The mass of flames seemed to solidify under the enormous pressure. It leaped through the skies like a backward shooting star of fire. The wingless drone performed a dodging maneuver, but it couldn't avoid it completely and burst into flames. Its metal composition warped in an instant, and it fell to the ground. Crag Burst roared madly as he charged from the raging flames, his buff body wrapped in a layer of fire. The clothes on his body had already been burnt clean, while his hair and eyebrows had turned into scorched masses under the high-temperature roasting. But no matter how much the flames burned, there existed an invisible divide to his skin. And so, not a bit of the fire stuck to his body, even though his skin was very red from the high-temperature roasting. Break! Crag Burst adopted a stance, and all the muscles of his body rippled like a wave. An invisible wave of air exploded from his body, forcefully blowing apart the layer of flames on his body and scattering sparks into the air. Crag Burst, with a completely naked body, swept his sights onto the distance crash zone of the drone. He let out another howl. The breath he stifled from a moment ago was vented a bit. And at this time, Luo Nan transmitted over the hexia somewhat incoherently. F***K, F***K, damn it all, Crag Burst, I thought you're still alive. Crag Burst spat and said, "You think my nickname is just for show? The crag rock has been split by the heat, and I did as per my name. You've met what lives under the clouds of explosions, haven't you? It is I, Crag Burst. Also, Scout, you need to go take the Society's junior-level seminars. The wording of your warning was extremely non-standard. In the case of a long-distance attack, the direction, the drop point, and nature need to be provided. These basic factors need to be first said." But then Luo Nan came with another warning before Crag Burst could finish chattering. "Dodge quick. get off the roadbed. The warning was still non-standard, but this time there was some relatively effective information inside. Crag Burst did not speak any further. He flipped and rolled off the public road, but he was half a second too late. Another surge of flame exploded along with a powerful shockwave. The glass windows on both sides of the public road, which weren't really intact in the first place, shattered from the vibration. It was yet another wingless drone, and this small-scale unmanned device was being used as a weapons platform. It had clearly learned a lesson from the last drone, as it held a distance of over a kilometer. It relied on radar and satellite to position and lock on accurately to the target's location. The range of Luo Nan's mental senses made it so that Luo Nan could only discover and warn Crag Burst after the weapon was launched. The pressure right now was enormous. Crag Burst withdrew underneath the roadbed to protect his body from being consumed by the flames. This was the most he could do right now. He couldn't help but curse loudly. Is this mofo a gangster? He's more like an arms dealer. Luo Nan spoke coldly. Isn't Quantum Corporation the world's #1 arms dealer? This has been set in stone after they launched their deep blue platform. That's right, Quantum Corporation. Crag Burst should have thought of this way earlier, but the impression that Quantum Corporation was the world's #1 company in advanced technology ran too deep. It was very hard to make the mental connection between Quantum Corporation and a gangster of the recycling stratum. Even if he did make the connection, it wouldn't have been to that degree. He can't be starting a war, right? He smashed the ground with a heavy fist, and the road couldn't support things anymore as the public road overturned. Crag Burst didn't dare to return back to the freight transport passageway. Instead, he charged towards the main building of Dashang. He rushed over and entered the building with a single breath. Crag Burst only gasped for breath after traveling 90 meters inside. This gangster nest had already been disturbed by the external situation at this time. Each of them stretched their necks out to look. The furious Crag Burst's entrance attracted everyone's gazes in an instant. It's that fellow. Crag Burst had been chasing Jack half an hour or so ago and had a gunfight with the people here. The group of gangsters had the image of this iron-hide buff dewed fresh in their memories. The group of people whipped out their guns at once. And then there was no then. Before Crag Burst could make his move, Luo Nan had made everyone here collapse. Even though the human-faced arachnid had reverted back to its wraith sign state, it was as easy as pie to knock these small fries unconscious with its current level of attack. Then all Crag Burst did was find someone who was relatively large. He stripped him of his clothes and covered up his vital areas. The entire process of events didn't even exceed 20 minutes, but Crag Burst's expression still remained unsightly. We've been delayed here for too long. Even if it is a truck, it should be over 10 kilometers away by now. Damn it. What the hell is that fellow up to in the end? Where is he taking Rui Wen? Just one look at Rui Wen's situation, and one would know that a control device had been installed in her body early on, making her powerless to resist. This sort of situation would occur from time to time in other underground fighting arenas. Its main purpose was for safety. But Jack clearly did this to capture her. This was far too strange. Rui Wen has just awakened to her ability. Is he selling ability users? Luo Nan recalled the conversation between Jack and the contact earlier. The contact had once said that any information related to Rui Wen must be immediately reported to Jack. Clearly, Rui Wen was a special existence within the underground fighting arena. Is it because Jack, or more clearly, had the power behind Jack discover Rui Wen's potential early on? The wingless drone circled around the Dashang building, constantly switching its search modes, locking onto the target's position, ensuring that the target couldn't charge out of the building and chase down Jack. Yan Yongbo sat quietly behind a business desk, looking at the videos streaming in real time. The door sounded with a beep. Hu Yuli used his high level of access privileges to forcefully root the door and enter. He saw the scene displayed by the holographic screen in front of Yan Yongbo, and his fury soared to the skies. "Assistant Yan, what the hell are you up to? As you can see, I'm providing some firepower." Yan Yongbo did not treat the Quantum Corporation's regional executive of the Xia City area with much respect. His butt didn't even leave his seat. Hu Yuli slammed his hands heavily against the table. "This is Xia City. This is the metropolis. This isn't the deep blue world. Do you know how many calls came in when the armed unmanned drone took off? The mayor's office, the security bureau, the social security bureau, the city defense force." Yan Yongbo raised his head to reveal a calm expression. Then the dark red tendons and muscles at the edge of his eyes pulsed slightly. The engendered feeling caused Hu Yuli to shut up in an instant. Hu Yuli's voice, tone, and attitude immediately became much more humble. "My boy, I have to resign from my position ever since the incident with the R&D district occurred. I'll back you with all my strength if you want the top seat. Do you want the Rainbow Fund? The Investment Society? I'll give it to you in a heartbeat, okay? But you can't just throw me in the fire later to be roasted." Yan Yongbo shook his head. "If someone's going to be roasted, then everyone's going to be roasted together. Do you think I want to become a target for others? But the issued research mission has the highest level of priority. I'm powerless." Hu Yuli, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, literally Hu Jade Reason Logic. Hu Yuli was first introduced in Chapter 22.1. He was doing PR talk about the R&D incident, the Darksider life form incident, to the Xia City branch of the Wilderness Explorers Society. Chapter 68, Position of the New Star Part. The research mission. You need to mobilize the weapons platform for that. Hu Yuli felt that this was illogical. "My boy, I know that you came from the deep blue world. It's true that actions there are very straightforward. The Apocalypse Laboratory is the core institution there. Everything revolves around the laboratory. But I'll repeat myself. This is Xia City. Here, the ones who write up the rules are the government and the military. We are a company. We use money and contacts to resolve issues. This is how we should do things. It doesn't matter who writes up the rules. The assessment department and their methods are what determine everything." Yan Yongbo leaned against his chair with clasped hands. "You are in charge of the company's board of directors. Your objective is revenue. I am in charge of the laboratories. My objective is to complete missions by the deadline. If you can't fulfill your objective, you resign with a bow. And if I can't fulfill my mission, I won't even have a place to stand. This is the difference between you and I." Hu Yuli took a deep breath. "My boy, everyone knows of each other's troubles, but weren't things just fine before? The pace, the personnel, and the facilities, everything was all well prepared. We're just waiting on the matter with gear. That is just an excavation mission. It's still lower priority than the research mission. Chief Hu, your full coordination over the past few days has not gone unnoticed by me. Excavation, research. In the end, Hu Yuli was on the upper levels of Quantum Corporation. He was just befuddled by the way too common title of the research mission. This time, when Yan Yongbo emphasized once again, Hu Yuli suddenly understood a bit. Your so-called research. Is it the Deep Blue Project or the Bloodline Project? Yan Yongbo raised his eyes and looked at him. What do you think? Hu Yuli knew that it would be better for him not to delve in too deep, since he was just about to resign from an executive position. He just took in a breath. All right then. All right. This time I was the one who was rude and impetuous. But my boy, no matter what mission it is, no matter how high its priority level, take special notice of what methods to use in order to not be wrong. The company is being extremely passive in Xia City due to the current situation in the R&D district. I have a lot of pressure. This sort of force is irreversible. Many missions will be disturbed, be it excavating or research. Don't you agree? Yan Yongbo wasn't a blind and arrogant individual. He saw that Hu Yuli had completely acknowledged his mistake, and he stood up with a laugh. He called for his secretary to deliver 2 cups of coffee inside. Chief Hu, the accident was very unfortunate. No one ever thought that the human-faced arachnid would revolt, just like no one will ever think that it's being eyed upon. The human-faced arachnid was an A project excavated from the Stellar Gate, and the project was destroyed right when we were so close to success. But this isn't the end. Gear is a B project. We've been doing quite well in it so far. But the problem is that the road to success is strewn with setbacks. An even higher priority matter has appeared, so we need to make it clear what is more important. Fortunately, this should only be a temporary mission. We'll just need a tense 2 days at most if everything goes smoothly. It won't affect the execution of the B project. I hope so. Hu Yuli didn't wait for the cup of coffee. He didn't need to drink coffee, for his heart was already filled with bitterness. He said his goodbyes at once. Yan Yongbo accompanied him to the entrance. Hu Yuli hesitated for a moment when he faced the door. In the end, he couldn't help turning his head and asking, "Can you answer one question?" "Please speak." I know the major significance of tapping into the Stellar Gate quite clearly. If we can grasp another deep blue world, we will completely change the course of human history. But that research, for what reason is it on a higher priority than the Stellar Gate? Is it because it's taboo? This question, my teacher back in the laboratory, Mr. Li Wei, had said this before. Everything can be considered mortal. Gods just need to master life. Yan Yongbo unfolded his hand. He probably thought that researching life is the domain of gods, that the standpoints of humans and gods are different. A madman. Hu Yuli shot a cold glance at Yan Yongbo. He didn't speak further while leaving with large strides. In the lower levels of the Deshang building, Crag Burst had slowly calmed down with the passing of time. After a muttering to himself for a moment, Crag Burst suddenly notified, "I'm contacting the society." Jack didn't bring the dozens of people in the fighting arena with him, but when Rui Wen awakened, he had his eyes on her. It's highly likely that he's an ability user trafficker. There are many underground powers who have similar raising mechanisms. As far as I know, they exhaust all methods to stimulate the target's potential, cause them to awaken, and then sell them for money. Large companies and secret orders are all excellent buyers. Crag Burst spoke chillingly coldly. These sort of situations can only be destroyed when one sees them. Right now, this isn't a matter just for a scout like you. It's something that the society needs to handle. Even if it's Quantum Corporation, if they don't pay up, I'll knock them to kingdom come. After releasing his ferocity, Crag Burst smashed his fist into his palm. The most important thing is to chase after him. Luo Nan was also helpless. Actually, if he were to set his heart on chasing Jack with his soul body, he would have been able to lock onto the target with his speed. But since Crag Burst had been attacked, impeding him, they had been delayed for quite a long time. Luo Nan should still be able to catch up to Jack, but Jack knew of the existence of Luo Nan's soul body. He wouldn't be stupid enough to stay idle in the truck and just drive out of the city right. And don't even mention the fact that Quantum Corporation had personally made its move. After providing firepower, they will probably provide distractions. It was far too easy to hide two people in the city of Xia, with its population of 200 million. Things would be fine if Cat Eyes were here. With her psychic perception, as long as she has touched Rui Wen before, she'll be able to lock onto Rui Wen if she's within 350 kilometers of distance. It'll be a cinch. Scout, your all-encompassing perception is this awesome, but you don't know anything about psychic perception. Oh right, aren't you a psychic? Why don't you give drawing a shot? Luo Nan didn't reply. Crag Burst knew that he was just indulging in a fantasy. He gritted his teeth and spoke. I'm going to first contact the society. We can't catch Jack, so we'll hand this task over. In short, we can't let this son of a B*****H run. I'll personally pinch his skull till it explodes. Crag Burst raged as he got in contact with the society. Luo Nan thought for a bit, and his soul body jumped to return back to the fighting arena. This place was just a sheet of chaos. The spectators were all withdrawing outwards, and there were 20-ish people who were unconscious or unfortunate enough to never wake up. They would need to be taken care of. Jack just washed his hands of these people, leaving a lot of pressure to those remaining in charge. Soon the fighting arena became completely empty, with not a few figures to be seen. And so the altar, which was established by the Human-Faced Arachnid using the negative emotions of the spectators, also became broken and disorderly. But from another perspective, Luo Nan was there, so the framework supporting the altar was there as well. The rules of the sacrificial ritual still persisted. The sacrificial ritual hadn't truly ended. Under the Iron Rule, where the winner takes all, the ultimate victor Rui Wen had yet to clearly accept or relinquish the complete power that she deserved. The Human-Faced Arachnid had borrowed the disturbance of the Greatmaw Basilisk as a substitute. The death of the Basilisk counted as a conclusion. But all the spectators present were sacrificial offerings. They were targets to be reaped. There still existed a connection between Rui Wen and the sacrifices, between Rui Wen and the altar's framework. Luo Nan could sense this point clearly. As for the place. Chapter 68, Position of the New Star, Part 2-2. Perhaps Luo Nan really could draw a drawing. Crag Burst had reminded Luo Nan of his own capacities as a psychic. Even though Luo Nan was still confused about the principles behind it, the facts proved that he really was gifted in this aspect. The greatest key point was that Luo Nan now had inspiration. This inspiration existed ever since the start of the sacrificial ritual. The insidious altar, the burning cloud sea, the splendid star, the tempered blade edge. And of course, there was also the empty desolation, the realm of death. Lines, composition, light and shadow. Various elements had undergone long analysis within the depths of his heart. Luo Nan was confident that even if he didn't realize it now, he would have recorded this scene down in careful study when he got home. An idea was born at this very moment. The impulse to draw became exceptionally strong. However, all of his previous experiences with sketching psychic drawings required a source and direction of development before pen could meet paper. Under direction, he made additions onto a pre-existing composition. But Luo Nan understood very little of Rui Wen's past. Oh, this might actually be easy. Luo Nan released the full strength of his mental senses in an instant. The personnel in charge were hard-pressed in the fighting arena. The panic-stricken spectators were scattered in the passageway. The gangsters were maintaining order while whispering to themselves. It didn't matter where any of these people were and what they were doing. They all felt a cold shiver at the same time. And in the lower-level area of the building, Ink, who had been accompanying Crag Burst, flapped its wings and flew off. It flew back towards the fighting arena despite the calls from Crag Bursts. Mr. Ma was in a deep daze as he lay upon the stretcher. He had his hand placed on his chest. The experience of choking and a heart attack from a few minutes ago still lingered around like a shadow, even though he was already administered drugs and was placed on a breathing machine. What in the world happened? He was a board member of a large biopharmaceutical company in Zia City. His net worth was in the hundreds of millions. Everyone addressed him as Mr. Ma. Wealth and woman were logically and expectedly just decorations to him. His life was an experienced life of 60 to 70 years. He needed entertainment and interests that were fresh. He needed stronger stimulation. He needed even higher feelings of success. What would be more interesting, more stimulating, more accomplishing than dictating the lives of his people? And so Mr. Ma fell in love with the fighting arena. He fell in love with the bloody atmosphere. He invested in this place. He just wanted to change things to make the fights more exciting, more stimulating. Today the fighting arena requested to borrow his most prized possession in his collection, the Greatmaw Basilisk Mutant. He agreed without the slightest hesitation. Actually, he had purchased this mutant for the sake of some future moment, to give a new show in the fighting arena. His wish was fulfilled earlier than expected. But a few minutes ago, his most prized piece of his collection, the Greatmaw Basilisk worth over 10 million credits, fell, crumbled, and putrefied right before his eyes. The destruction of the basilisk wasn't the end of the world, but the way it died, the will that instantly caused death to descend, the force of fear that exceeded his limit of self-control, heavy struck his chest. Who had caused all of this? Rui Wen. It was Rui Wen, the girl who struggled in the cage he had made. He remembered when she first came to the fighting arena 3 years ago. She was so skinny and small that she looked like she was 6 to 7 years old. She only came to be her current size due to the stimulation from drugs. She was a fighting genius. Not counting her training time, she became the king of the fighting arena with her 100 victories within a short 1 year. But no matter how much of a genius Rui Wen was, in the end, she was just a toy in the palm of his hand. Everything time he saw Rui Wen feign tranquility. This tranquility was always within a situation where her life was at stake. Mr. Ma always had a sense of satisfaction spring up unbidden. Her fist was very hard. Her speed was very quick. But no matter how quick and how hard she would never be able to break past the transparent defensive walls surrounding her. This is what it means to dictate. This is pleasure. Why was today totally different? From beginning to end, not a hair on his head was harmed. But there was an invisible ice-cold hand that clutched his throat, pushing him onto the ugly corpse of the basilisk to make him taste the flavor of fear and death as much as possible. Rui Wen, that predator, that ominous crow. The exit is just ahead. The medical personnel next to him spoke in relief. An ambulance is already parked in the parking lot. Mr. Ma is the first, then. The fluttering flapping of wings sounded forth. It seemed to fly straight over his head. The medical personnel cried in shock. What a large crow! Mr. Ma suddenly opened his eyes. The lightning changed since the stretcher just so happened to leave the passageway. The black shadow of a crow flipped over atop of their heads, shining a devilish outline of shadow and light before their eyes. The medical personnel waved his hand by instinct to drive away the crow, but all he got was a pitch-black feather floating down. And a glance, which was like a demon's eye of desolation, was cast towards them. Rui Wen. Mr. Ma suddenly sat up. The movement caused his blood to surge, and the rupturing sound of his heart turned into the knell of death that rang loudly. His eyes bulged, and then he collapsed. His last mournful cry echoed back as it reflected over and over in the arched passageway. Rui Wen, Rui Wen, Rui Wen. The enormous crow smacked its wings, coming over with a sweep. Not one person in the entire passageway made a sound within this extremely short period of time. Not one person made a move. Fear gripped their throats. It was as if an ice-cold tide had engulfed them one by one. Rui Wen, Rui Wen. This name seemed to transform into a demonic incantation. It bred and spread from inside out, from you to me. The predator, the crow, the flat-chested witch. Fragments of memories rummaged over in their minds, intertwining with their emotions. Like the crow's wing that swept over, they smeared a grave picture of ominousness and fear. The crow swept through the passageway and charged into the empty fighting arena. There it spiraled around in the air. From Luo Nan's perspective, the crow was a black cloud of negative emotions that pushed its way through. The interweaving lines that outlined the altar were within the surging clouds. Hundreds of fuzzy human figures rushed about and wailed in distress from within. Compared to their stupidity from before, they seemed to have a clearer understanding of their own positions. They had turned from illusionary dictators to become, in reality, hogs and lambs. Countless scenes of memories of Rui Wen appeared and mixed within the altar, most of them with fragmentary and warped. They assembled together to form a fuzzy image of Rui Wen. Countless aspects were pieced together, but the image was far too biased. Luo Nan contemplated. The Rui Wen that he saw was different from the Rui Wen that these people saw. Admittedly, Rui Wen fought with and was victorious over the human-faced Arachnid, and Rui Wen's slaughtering of the Greatmaw Basilisk left far too deep of an impression in the people's minds. But Luo Nan's first impression of Rui Wen was of her back in the waiting area. She had a towel over her head, and she had spoken in a childish manner. She was a young child that used words like Mr. Crow. She had fallen within the circle of her own self-logic. Perhaps she identified herself more as a crow than a person. But no matter what, she was the unrivaled victor over all the sacrifices and all the rewards atop Luo Nan's altar. Luo Nan was the support for the framework of the altar. His duty was to bless the victor. Ink let out a call that was quite unpleasant to the ears, but this husky sound converged together with a surging shout on the mental plane, and the result was suddenly tossed into the Xia city's night skies. The sole victor, Rui Wen. The black clouds surged and boiled. A splendid star rose up above the skies, and its sharp radiance swept and cut through the clouds and mist. The outlining structure of the altar turned incomparably clear. It was in the exact same shape as Luo Nan's pyramid structure. The splendid star would occasionally enter the pyramid and would occasionally roam out of the pyramid. She followed her own special orbit, and she possessed a marvelous and clear relationship with the pyramid structure. Chapter 69, Breath of the Deep's Part. Rui Wen was projected onto the altar as a star, and this star was projected into Luo Nan's heart as well. It wouldn't directly tell Luo Nan Rui Wen's position in the real world, but that connection and its corresponding information were unrivaled. This cognition manifested itself within Luo Nan's call and blessings. It exploded in the middle of the dense black clouds, like fiery thunder surging towards the skies. The earnest rolling thunder, the diffusion of psychic waves, swept across the night skies of Xia City to join with the millions and millions of life forms in juxtaposition. There was only one target on the planet that would give the right match. Luo Nan had an epiphany, and this was his attempt at acting upon it. It was like the stroke of God that leads to his drawings. He didn't know if he would obtain the expected result. All he could do now was to wait. Scout, scout! The sound of Crag Burst calling out brought Luo Nan back to reality. I'm here. What the hell did you leave for? I'm at the fighting arena. I'm seeing if there are any trails of Rui Wen. It's in preparations of making a psychic drawing. Huh, so how is it? Can you do it? It's hard to tell. Right now lies just came out of Luo Nan as easily as opening his mouth. But this wasn't really a lie in a certain sense. He really had been preparing for the psychic drawing, but now the drawing was already completed. Crag Burst was a bit disappointed, but soon he changed topics. The secretary wants to talk to you. She asks if now's a convenient time. The secretary, oh, you mean Sister He? Yeah, now's good. How is it not convenient? Luo Nan just felt that things were odd. Yuan could have just contacted him directly using the hexawea. Why did she first go through Crag Burst? Crag Burst went oh, and soon a new call came through. Hello, Mr. Luo, sir. This is Yuan, Society Internal Codename Secretary. Sister He. Luo Nan didn't understand why she suddenly mentioned an internal code name. It sounded like she wanted to get reacquainted again. It was very odd. Yuan soon explained. The Society has already received Crag Burst's report and has decided to intervene in this matter. Due to the relationship to a certain company, the Society has entered confidential procedures in order to avoid trouble. Those participating in the operation are addressed by internal code names, without exception. The pre-briefing and post-briefing will be in accordance with these procedures. Considering how your circumstances are special, the operation briefing from Friday night will be treated accordingly by the public release on Monday. Luo Nan suddenly felt that things were so bureaucratic. It was as if he had entered a department of the military. Had the ability user society always been like this? Crag Burst soon explained everything with deep emotion. What a change in customs. It's like I'm back in the army. Yuan continued her dispatch. As for you, Luo Nan, sir, the code name I originally drafted for you is called Artist. It's very good, very fitting. But it's way too fitting. It's too easy for people to make the mental connection. Apologies, I've heard a few things about you, sir, from Crag Burst. The current circumstances that you and your family face are not suited to stand in the foreground of politics. Perhaps, Luo Nan thought of Yongbo at this time. I just heard Crag Burst call you Scout. This codename is quite vague, it's more appropriate. Let's use this code name for the current operation, if you don't mind. No problem. Luo Nan didn't care about this sort of empty reputation. He was more concerned about the next steps in coordinating with the society to save Rui Wen as soon as possible. Then he coughed, "Secretary, what are we doing next?" "Reinforcements will arrive soon, and the society will put the entire city under surveillance. The decision on the situation will be dependent on whether Quantum Corporation is willing to negotiate." Then Crag Burst and I. "As for you, there currently isn't a clear mission for you. This is because there is a matter that needs to be handled as soon as possible." Yuan voice was tranquil. "Mrs. Luo Shuking just sent you to Zia City's Renai Hospital 2 minutes ago. The current diagnosis for you is a persistent loss of consciousness, a light coma." "Who?" Crag Burst nearly heard something insane. "Isn't Scout right here? You're talking about his main body." Luo Nan was speechless for a time. He didn't know about how long he had stayed in his out-of-body state until now. It must have been at least 3–4 hours. He had been pretending to be asleep before his soul left his body, and his soul had traveled in a circle around the city. It was time to go home. Clearly, it had been impossible for him to get off the car by himself. This was yet another time when he wasn't able to be awakened within the short past 2 days. And this time, he really couldn't be awakened. It must be known that Luo Nan's aunt and uncle had snuck in an evaluation for Luo Nan with the doctor when they visited Luo Nan's grandfather. It was unavoidable for these two guardians to be overly imaginative under these circumstances. "Mr. Luo, Crag Burst said that Sir has attached his soul onto the crow, but I don't believe this is true." Yuan didn't call him by his code name. This matter had nothing to do with the operation. Luo Nan saw that his out-of-body state matters could not be concealed any longer, and was just about to spill the beans when Yuan said, "I've consulted with Lao Wen. Your current state is very likely to be a highly complicated version of a soul-sending state. In other words, most of your consciousness, or maybe your soul, has been projected via your ability to come onto the crow's body. This is a very troublesome situation. This causes sustained wear and tear to yourself and the target of the sent soul. If you don't separate yourself in time, the consequences will be extremely serious. I've already told Crag Burst that you don't need to go anywhere right now. Mr. Bai of the Society is rushing over here right now. He's a master in dream techniques. His academics in soul studies are very deep. Let him come make a diagnosis. I'll handle the situation with the hospital." Wait, sister I'm at this." Luo Nan didn't know why the most powerful psychic of the society, Yu Lao, would make a mistake in judgment. Right now, though, he clearly didn't have time to tarry over this matter. He was just about to explain when his consciousness suddenly went sluggish. "Do you hear something, Mr. Luo?" Luo Nan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he concentrated his energy to listen. He had a better answer a breath later and immediately spoke. "Sister help me out. Brother Octopus has a better understanding of my situation. Talk to him for a moment. I seem to have discovered Rui Wen right now." "Where is she?" asked Crag Burst and Yuan at the same time. "Let me make sure." A marvelous feeling was fed back once again from a far distance before he could finish speaking. Luo Nan's mind was like a stone in freefall. It was drawn over to the greatest degree under the wonderful effects of gravity. Boom! The stone fell into the water, sending clear ripples surging. The surrounding environment suddenly went quiet, and only this small stone of his continued to fall. His consciousness chafed against the water, and minute noises soon mixed in with the weak background noise. Finally, things became serene. Luo Nan was not puzzled at all by this marvelous perception. The pulling effect between the pyramid structure and the star told him that his consciousness had actually locked onto Rui Wen's position and was trying to contact Rui Wen's consciousness. As for the reason why was there this deep body of water, there was actually a reference to this before. Jack's defenses around his consciousness were like this. Only Jack's conscious defenses ought to have stemmed from his body being altered. It was stable, firm, and rigid. It was like a pool of half-frozen backwater. As for Rui Wen, she was breathing. You lao Chinese letter, literally you old. He was first mentioned in chapter 36.1. He is one of the few psychics in the society. Chapter 69, Breath of the Deeps, Part 2-2. Luo Nan felt a certain tempo coming deep within the waters. It was barely distinguishable. It was none other than the peaceful and drawn-out breathing of being in deep sleep. It seemed that Rui Wen wasn't causing ripples, but she was constantly breathing in the new and breathing out the old in a natural cadence. Rui Wen's body and consciousness were highly integrated within this cadence. Of course, this wasn't the monotonous undulation of force. It was the joint effect of various components such as breathing, blood flow, and the movements of inner organs. It was like a harmonious rhythm played by a symphonic orchestra. Even her soul had merged within. It was practically perfect. Luo Nan was able to confirm that it was probably impossible for his siege hammer attack, which ignored the defenses of the corporeal body and attacked the soul directly, to work against Rui Wen in her current state. Rui Wen had merged her soul and her fleshly body perfectly together. The internal was harmonious with the external. They were complete as one. A purely mental attack would become greatly scattered. This was precisely what happened with Jack. Indeed, the method that Jack used was absolutely clear and logical. When Luo Nan engaged with Jack in battle, Luo Nan's siege hammer attack had no effect. Luo Nan couldn't understand the reason behind this no matter how much he thought. He could only conclude the reason to be the fact that Jack was an altered human. Now his understanding became much clearer. Of course, being altered was certainly an element in how Jack was able to achieve this. Rui Wen relied only on the simplest method, breathing, to reach this stage. Perhaps she was a true genius. When Luo Nan's understanding grew this far, the body of water slowly lit up. His consciousness illuminated within the water, and he genuinely saw Rui Wen this time. He gave this girl a light scan of her status. Rui Wen was still unconscious. Luo Nan was unable to see any other changes. Luo Nan tried to wake her up, but he failed. The cause for this was very simple. Rui Wen was currently in a certain state of merging. It was very hard to separate the boundary between her body and her consciousness. Luo Nan's simple contact on the mental plane was clearly far too weak. He was incapable of forming enough stimulation to wake her up. There was a very key area over here. Rui Wen's merged state was a dual harmonization between her body and her consciousness. Neither one of the two fulcrums could be lacking. The problem lay in Rui Wen's current unconscious state. Logic dictates that she couldn't possibly achieve a true merging in this state. If she had truly merged, she wouldn't be unconscious. She would certainly have achieved absolute mastery over body and mind. A paradox seemed to have formed between her state of unconsciousness and her merging. It was here where the main culprit of Rui Wen's lasting unconsciousness lay. Luo Nan had already discovered the source of this cause before. While Rui Wen's current state was practically perfect, there were still some flaws. The problem did not lay in Rui Wen herself, but stemmed from an outside disturbance. There were two in total, one in her skull, another in her chest. These were the devices that Jack had implanted into her body long ago. The device in her chest discharged electricity. It was stuck to her spinal column. The purpose of this electric discharge weapon was to destroy Rui Wen's mobility within the shortest time frame. But with a scan by Luo Nan, it seemed like this toy had already failed. Perhaps it was destroyed by the recall of Rui Wen's powerful ability. The true source of the disturbance was still the device in the skull. That toy was constantly emitting an interfering pulse. The pulse wasn't particularly strong, but it was able to break Rui Wen's harmonious system, causing Rui Wen's merging rate between her mind and body to be lacking by just a little bit. It was this little bit that made Rui Wen unconscious until now. This was a bit troublesome. Luo Nan wasn't a neurosurgery specialist. Even if he was, the little bit of consciousness he projected over here wouldn't be able to perform an open-brain surgery. Sure enough, he would have to rely on external reinforcements. Luo Nan grudgingly let go of his thoughts of awakening Rui Wen. He did the next best thing. He had his projected consciousness act as a fulcrum, or in other words, a signal relay tower, to strengthen the connection with his soul body. Luo Nan's soul body was still at the Deshang building right now. The range of his all-encompassing sense was still only 500 meters. The wide area outside that range was fuzzy and black. Of course, when this signal tower was erected, a dark zone in the distance lit up with a mass of light. The map of that small piece of area was lit up as well. The range of Luo Nan's mental senses did not increase. Instead, he had projected his senses to the designated location. He looked down from above like he had opened up a rough satellite image. The resolution was extremely terrible, but it was gradually improving. It also contained something that was impossible for a satellite photo to possess. It was a small, real-time panoramic map. Luo Nan was like a specter hovering in the skies above right now. A better-sounding description would be, God. Luo Nan saw Jack in the next moment. Jack clearly didn't detect Luo Nan's existence. This was because Luo Nan was relying on the signal tower erected within Rui Wen's body. Luo Nan's existence was concealed within Rui Wen's aura. There was an interference effect. Anyway, Luo Nan didn't pay particular attention to Jack. This was to avoid this crafty fellow from raising his guard. He was mainly focused on the surrounding environment. Sure enough, Jack had ditched the truck halfway. Right now, he was standing in the living room of some apartment in contemplation. Rui Wen was at a hand's reach away on the sofa. The location of the apartment was not clear, and Luo Nan wasn't sure whether or not this was Jack's property. But after some thought, Luo Nan realized that Xia City, an AI city covered in networks, was practically defenseless from Jack's perspective thanks to the dynamo core. Luo Nan wanted to determine the location of this apartment, but it wasn't easy. The recently opened, small map had a finite range. It wasn't even large enough to cover the entire apartment. There was a fog of war in the middle. The only information that was clear was the direction and distance. He had to compare this with a map of Xia City to make a guess. Luo Nan made adjustments to the precision and range of his senses while he compared what he saw with a map on the psychic wave network. He discovered a relatively ideal midpoint. Right when Luo Nan was being tormented by his research, a call came through over at Jack's side. Jack was deep in thought while he stood in the living room when his wristband vibrated. He gave a cold laugh and made a gesture. The hologram in the living room lit up. A figure, one that had left Luo Nan a deep impression, appeared clearly. "Hey Jack, how does it feel to become the center of the world?" Yongbo raised the coffee cup in his hands, sending his greetings from far, far away. Jack responded indifferently. "It's not that great. I've turned from the house into a gambler, and now there's pressure on the entire family. Even when you have a blackjack in your hand. If you have time to joke around, you have time to tell me the route I should transfer to. Actually, I thought you would tell me that there's a car parked downstairs when you first called me." Luo Nan could tell that the relationship between Jack and Yongbo was a cold one. Yongbo put down his cup of coffee and shrugged his shoulders. "Apologies. I thought it would be better to first give a call for the sake of safety. And also, I can't help saying a few words. Before I returned to Zia City, I believed that my mission had the highest level of priority. This made me a bit vain, but I never thought there would be a higher level job that would force me to stop my work and go coordinate with others. I have to say, Jack, you hit it very well. Your dedication to work is very admirable." That's a wrap for this installment. Thank you all for watching and supporting Lord of the Stories. If you enjoyed this tale, please hit the like button, share it, and subscribe for more amazing stories. You can also explore other series updated daily in our playlists. Have a fantastic day and see you in the next episode.